listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great. So we always like to finish the podcast on a lighter note, but I've got a lighter note question to start the podcast for you this time, which is, are you a coffee or tea drinker for your morning pick-me-up?
Neither. I am a Coca-Cola or Pepsi or any type of cola. That's how I get my caffeine. I'm not a coffee fan, although I love the aroma. I just can't enjoy the taste.
I mean, I think the reason most people get addicted to drinking coffee in the morning is the strong amount of caffeine. So the reason I even brought this topic up was this was a discussion I got into with a client this week, and we had about 50% coffee drinkers and 50% tea drinkers. I love the way tea tastes. There's just not enough caffeine for me to get me going.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to tea. I just, what I'm thinking here is I'm not a hot beverage type of person. If I'm having something to drink, I generally want it to be cool and refreshing. Maybe room temperature water is about the most I would go with it, but I'm not a hot beverage person.
Now, what do you get when you go to Starbucks?
I get either a lemonade or a Coke and a brownie or something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they have so many good choices, man. They have these things called frappuccinos that are pretty much just like coffee milkshakes. They're wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into any of that. That's not my jam. I'm a cola person. I will extol the virtues of Pepsi or Coke or RC or any of the other cola products that are out there.
Yeah, the frappuccino tastes wonderful, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody in the listening. Everybody who's listening to the show right now, but one grande, which is their medium size frappuccino, has the fat and sugar equal to 2 Snickers bars.
Yeah, see, I'd rather just eat the Snickers bar.
Yeah, that's what I realized too. That's why I rarely get them, but every once in a while they're a fun treat.
I guess, I don't know. Not for me. This is not my thing. But yeah, welcome to Coffee Talk. If you're tuning in around the world, we're here talking about our favorite hot beverages. Just to recap, I have none, and Jim apparently likes frappuccinos, which I thought that was cold drink, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like those. My favorite hot beverage, though, is definitely anything coffee-based.
Gotcha. Okay. How are we going to tie this back to identity, or are we just going to have an awkward transition to something else?
No, I was going to say another fun treat is when you do not have to log into something because it's passwordless.
Oh, that is a good transition. Yes.
That was slick,
I'm assuming,
right?
Yeah, that was very slick. That's why we're the professionals that we are. I'm assuming you're talking about this article from Krebs on Security that we'll have a link to in our show notes about your phone may soon replace many of your passwords, which is based on the announcement that Apple, Google, and Microsoft made last week. Today, we're recording this May 13th, and it'll go live on, 14th, 16th. So this will have been last week. The announcement that basically kind of all the big players have signed on to this passwordless approach, leveraging FIDO, which is great, which is, I know, something that you and I have been involved with as well from a support standpoint. So what's the gist here from this article?
Yeah, don't mean to be a shill for FIDO, but I think it's a little hard not to be a fanboy from our perspective that, look, FIDO is a standard and an organization designed around setting a standard for authentication based on possession. So possession of a token, whether it be a phone or a key like a YubiKey, so that you strengthen authentication and at the same time simplify for a user by removing authentication based on a knowledge-based authentication, so like remembering a password. The gist of the article is that the major players are taking this standard, leveraging the devices that you already have today, whether it be your phone or your tablet or PC, and using a biometric or a PIN that can be leveraged to take the place of that password authentication to authenticate to websites that have this integration. The great part of that is obviously it's a stronger form of security and eliminates the need for people to remember passwords. The potential downside of that is that I don't think it really addresses the one of the biggest problems with password from a hacker perspective is that the hackers are going to a lot of times, other than phishing, probably the number one threat vector. Number two threat vector is that if you follow the unhappy path, in other words, you forgot your password and you have to go through a password reset process and use, God forbid, use secret questions. Um, that becomes a weakness in the chain is that unhappy path.
Yeah, and people try to exploit that. Forgot, and I think part of this, right? This passkey is also tied to a device, so people will lose devices or people can't use a device. I know I've run into a couple of clients recently who have, a population of users that don't have devices for any reason. It could be that's just not allowed because it's like a shop floor or clean room environment, or the perception that, well, if you're going to put this thing on my phone, then you better pay for it, kind of thinking, which, while unfortunate, actually exists in the real world, have to be designed around. So, maybe that's where YubiKeys or other types of kind of dumb devices that are associated with a passwordless environment could be helpful. I've seen one scenario where, this is kind of old school, but calling you on a trusted device, so making like a phone call, those sorts of things. So, um, I like the idea of passwordless. I still think we're a ways out from actually being more popular in the real world, despite things like Touch ID and Windows Hello being out there. It's still not prevalent enough. And I think I saw like Microsoft is working on it over the next year. So I think this is still the very beginnings of kind of real passwordless in the world, but it's an encouraging step, especially once you get kind of the three main players from a identity and a device perspective to be part of this. So you've got Apple, obviously, with the iPhones. You've got Microsoft with Windows. You've got Apple with Mac OS, and you've got Google with, the whole Google environment and Android to some degree. I'll be curious to see how well it pervades into the Android market with devices, because I think Samsung is probably the biggest Android player right now, or at least maybe the most well known. Are they signing on to this? Because a lot of Android vendors will also, reskin the Android environment, sometimes to their own detriment. I wonder how well they'll support that, or if Google will be able to bake it right into the OS that it's difficult to kind of peel out.
Yeah, there's so many different approaches to identity verification now. But I think that's where this ultimately ends up, with this unhappy path discussion. So this is not something that is new with this FIDO announcement. Certainly not, right? In the traditional sense, you have somebody who forgot their password or lost their multi-factor authentication token. In an enterprise environment, I remember a lot of organizations saying, well, then the person will have to come into the office and go to the help desk, or will have to get their manager on the phone. And kind of a lot of scenarios that, one, maybe work well in that enterprise environment, but two, the modern workplace has changed a lot with the pandemic, right? A lot more people are remote, and going into an office just doesn't have the same, doesn't resonate as something that is a scalable or feasible solution in all cases. But even that scenario where you say, well, maybe we'll do the callback, you could actually see where that wouldn't work, right? That legitimately somebody could say, I don't have that phone number anymore. If I used your website 3 years ago to buy something, and now I'm coming back 3 years later, and I contact customer support or whatever, and they say, well, let me call you on the phone number that we have on file. I might not have that phone number anymore, and that could be completely legitimate. So what you've seen in terms of identity verification is some things like, well, there's the voice biometric, which you don't see very often, right? There's very few places that seem to be using my voice as my password, even though I'm a big fan of it. I think that um, I think
I implemented it 15 years ago.
yeah.
I've done the implementation for it. It's a very cool technology and it works. I
I,
learned a lot about transient voice characteristics and non-transient as I kind of went through that deployment. But it is interesting. I thought it would be more popular than it is. It just hasn't taken off.
yeah. And I guess I get the sense that, when you're doing that, my voice is my password, it has to, you have to kind of tune it for false positives or false negatives, right? Is to make sure that, hey, today somebody's got a cold, or, you
Yep.
know, it's been a couple of years and maybe their voice has changed a little bit. You don't want to wind up rejecting that person. It's really them.
That's part of the tuning process. And I remember being pretty fascinated, even, it's been a while since I've touched it, but 15 years ago when I actually deployed it, I was surprised to learn that a lot of characteristics of a voice don't change when you're sick, have a cold, etc. But there certainly is that tuning period. It could be any number of things that could potentially alter some of the characteristics. But I can only imagine that the technology has gotten better since then. I just don't see it very often. I really haven't seen it in play since then. I think people have kind of shifted to this smartphone, text message, push notification, email notification type approach.
Yeah, it seems like it would make a lot of sense as either a backup method to the device. I do really support the device because the happy path, which is 99.9% of the time, works fantastic. But the unhappy path that we just talked about, I lose my device, change my phone number, and that clean room scenario, which is happy path with a twist, it's where you'd like to have some biometric that isn't device dependent, that I could go on and they could look at me through my camera or something that is not device driven, you know, say even if it was like a fingerprint, but that fingerprint was stored in the cloud. Now that provides privacy concerns, obviously, right? If you're keeping my voice print or my retina scan or my fingerprint in, especially fingerprint in the cloud, what could that mean from a privacy perspective? But it does seem like it would provide potential to solve for those. And, the other identity verification mode that I've been thinking about here is the document verification. So it's,
Mhm.
you have a picture of your
The proofing
passport,
aspect, right?
the
Yeah.
proof, yeah, the identity proofing aspect. But it seems like that's fine for a certain level of assurance, right? So if you're talking about, travel with TSA or something where the investment of time is worth it. You're not going to use that for, I'm going to buy a 6-pack of socks on your website. I'm going to take a picture of my passport. Like, no way, no how. So certainly all these things need to be in balance. And maybe that's where, you know, these improvements to go passwordless make even more sense because that device driven FIDO authentication, the more it becomes ubiquitous, the more we're willing to go through that to buy a pair of socks rather than create an 8-character password.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be frictionless. That's kind of the thing. And I think uh, it's a scenario also where it doesn't have to be the same solution for every member of the population. If you can get, maybe it makes sense for device based for, a certain segment, great. And maybe you have another option that is voice based, another option that might be like some sort of physical token, right? Type thing. Um, I don't, I would hate to get locked into this is the only way that things get done. You must have a mobile device. It must be an Apple. It must be an iPhone of this make, model, this OS level. Otherwise, you can't use it. Nobody can use it. That doesn't make any sense. And I think that's also one of the concerns that I've heard too around kind of vendor lock-in as well. Because you think about, okay, well, it's either an Android phone or it's an Apple iPhone. Those are really kind of the two dominant players in the market. How is a startup going to be able to come in and challenge either of those things? Or what happens if you shift from Android to Apple? How are your passkeys going to go from one device to another? Especially when you have competition between Apple and Google and Microsoft, right? Who's going to be sort of like the how are you going to be able to port your things from one device to another and limit the impacts of going through that unhappy path that people will try to exploit, because that's going to be the weak link no matter what. That's what I'm concerned about. And I was just having an odd thought here too, where we're kind of thinking about Windows Hello and the voice biometrics. It's in the name, Windows Hello, and yet there's no voice biometrics capability. That just seems very weird to me.
That's a good point. That's also very device centered, right? You set up Windows Hello, it's just for the device that you set it up on, right? It doesn't carry over to your other devices.
Yep. Yeah, maybe your voice sounds different behind a mask versus not.
Yeah, probably. Just to pick on that point that you made about creating a barrier to entry to creating another phone operating system, I kind of don't feel like authentication is what's holding back whatever that budding operating system.
There's a ton of other things, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't what crashed BlackBerry, right?
Yeah, maybe BlackBerry will come back with a better iOS. I doubt it at this point, but hey, prove me wrong.
I think the thing that kind of made BlackBerry what it was that little keyboard, right? But in the end of the day, I think people kind of started to realize, like, we don't actually need that keyboard.
Well, there's some diehards out there that, will swear by them. I never really cared for it, but I can understand the idea. I was like, okay, we got comfortable with Blackberries and keyboards. Android phones had it for a little while. I remember the T-Mobile Sidekick was like that sideways one that kind of flipped out, had the kind of the keyboard on it. And then I think software caught up and it became just as easy to type on a tablet screen or a phone screen with the same accuracy, and people just kind of got rid of it because then you could devote more screen space to the device versus having to say, well, half this device is going to be keyboard. I don't think anybody would make that trade now. But you still see now you have tablets with keyboard add-ons. You can certainly add a Bluetooth keyboard to your phone if you want something like that. Samsung has the foldables that could potentially devote more screen space to the typing experience, those sorts of things. But here I am nerding out on mobile devices. Pull me back, Jim.
Yeah, I think you're right on. And the other thing is, like, I think we all have a love-hate relationship now with spell check. It's like we never have to complete a complicated word. It fills it in for us. But at the same time, if you don't check that text before you send it, you might say something you didn't mean to say.
Especially as the autocorrect learns some words you might be using. They may not be the nomenclature that you would like to go out to that particular message. I do find it fascinating that you can basically type out the general gist of a word and even an entire sentence, and it will fix it for you pretty well.
It's amazing how well it does.
Yeah.
But you could really end up killing a relationship if you send the wrong thing. Obviously,
let's stay positive. You could start a relationship too. You never know.
You never know. You mean to tell somebody I really don't like you, and you wind up telling them you really do like them. And they say, you know what? Maybe I've been too hard on Jeff.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So your phone is gonna replace your passwords. You heard it here first. And it's gonna start next week.
Or you heard it here last, either way.
Yeah, depending on when you're listening to the podcast. What's the other topic we want to talk through today? Because I think we were going to talk through sort of this philosophy of plan, build, run. I think we're going to start at more like an IT level, and then there was another article that we'll put in our show notes here from CIO Insight. But what's the gist here?
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of harkens back to something you and I have been working together for 7 years. That's why we can kind of not long enough as being
we can almost finish each other's
sentences, but that could be a spell check. I could have said something else if I was a little more quick-witted, but anyway, one of the things that we've kind of both agree on is this model of plan, build, run. The idea is, how can you take IT and divide it into plan, build, and run components, and how do those work together and interact? And so PBR is kind of this IT model of breaking things down into plan being responsible for strategy and roadmap, run being your operations and build being your project management, and construction of IT systems. And so, that it serves well taking that mindset into identity and access management. Jeff, with our advisory work that we've done together over the years, it's kind of within that planning realm, right? It's the strategy and the roadmap. But really why I wanted to bring this up is I was having some thoughts this week in terms of, as these, major sections exist, plan, build, and run, is how do you transition work from planning to building to running and back again? How does that loop all work? And I think some of those touch points are really key, right? As you build a strategy, ultimately it needs to feed into project management. So that strategy needs to be able to be communicated to, in multiple different ways, right? Like one of the things I think about it with a strategy is like there needs to be a blueprint level, but there also needs to be an artist's rendition. So think of like I'm building a new development and I haven't built a house yet, but I know what house I'm going to build in the first house in the development. And I want people to be able to come and buy that house, like pay me money to go ahead and build that house, or even, multiple houses. Maybe I have a model home, but I don't want somebody to come in and try to understand what I'm doing and lay out a blueprint. And it's, here's where I'm going to lay the first brick. And here's like a drawing of, everybody knows what a blueprint looks like, right? Blueprint's not an effective way to get people to fall in love with like, oh, I want to live there, right? So they have these artist renditions, which are drawings, or they look like watercolors of here's what the finished house is going to look like. It's got beautiful furniture in it. It's got a house plant in the corner. So I think it's very important to have those things. But I think from a technologist perspective, it's that blueprint that's very important, because that's where you're going to start to define what projects are going to get you to your strategic goals. And then they spin out to the build team, which has to then go and define and build projects. But let me pause there to see if you were having any thoughts as I was talking through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is so the part that I want to pull on is the transition point, because I feel that's like one of the most important things that often gets overlooked and is where most organizations struggle with. I kind of talk about it as, okay, when are we going to stop talking and start doing? Plan and, is sort of the talking part of it. But at some point, you got to stop talking and start actually doing things to solve problems. Um, and I also think a strategy is important, but it shouldn't be looked at as this is how we're going to do it in the real world, down to the very specific details. A lot of that stuff comes out when you're actually doing the build out or implementing or whatever that looks like from an identity perspective, for example. So we can have a strategy that says, okay, going forward, the integration patterns that we will support are SAML or OpenID, and that's it. Okay, well, in the real world, you're probably going to have apps that can't support either of those or require too much effort to reconfigure, and you're left with something else. So the strategy is sound. Yes, you want to use more modern authentication if you can. But in the real world, when you go to implement maybe this access management solution, you want to do single sign-on or whatever it might look like, is there will be wrinkles that don't, come up as part of building out the strategy that you're also going to have to kind of devise plans around. Either you address it or you don't, or you kick that can down the curb and you wait another year to build out that app to do the integration. So I think you need to have, I think the strategy is often looked at, I think sometimes as, well, it's a blueprint and it's gold and it will never change. And it's sometimes I see folks that want to make that almost like a run book. Like, here is as built documentation, but that's a totally different thing from developing a strategy.
Yeah. Strategies have to evolve, and it's interesting. So I was thinking there's this gray area that spans between plan and build, and then between build and run. on that gray area between plan and build, I think is what you were starting to get at, which is, all right, we know we need to implement a single sign-on system. So or a privileged access management system, right? And you might say, here's the strategic goals of what we want to accomplish, and this is what we think it's going to look like. But then there's got to be a project to gather requirements and, business and technical requirements, and produce a system design document and put together basically the plan for building it. But I don't think that I think building of the plan is more build than it is plan. To me, plan is at the strategy level. It's doing your strategies, doing your budget. And then there's the persistent things like steering committee. How do you keep people engaged? How do you do that two-way communication? In fact, the communication is updates of what's happening in build, what's happening in run. It's getting feedback from the user community and like, this is working well, this is not working well, this is, priorities need to change. These are things coming out of maybe an audit or things that are happening in our industry that are affecting us, maybe new privacy regulations, things like that. All that gets captured in build and is part of this, steering committee process. We had a discussion last week where we said decisions are not made in committee. I think that's right on. So there's all this like back channel stuff that has to happen. I think all that kind of happens within the dome of build, or I'm sorry, the dome of plan. Yeah.
Yeah, the politics that we talked about last week. I think you're totally right on. The other thing I think about is things don't always fit neatly into this plan, build, run idea. I think what actually happens is, even if you're following a philosophy of, okay, we've got plan, build, and run, we have a plan, now we're working through implementation, and now we've gone live with whatever service it is, which means it's out there in the real world as some sort of run. The reality is that there are probably a whole bunch of plan, build, run cycles that are taking place at any given point. And they might even be within a certain project or across projects or capabilities, wherever it may be. So if you're looking for like this clean, like, okay, we've finished the plan part, hate to break it to you, that's not the way it works. You've maybe finished it for right now, but you're going to be coming back around because it's basically a continuous loop. So the way I see it is, okay, we've planned and we've got our strategy. Now we're doing the implementation. The implementation has gone live. Now we're into run. Now the run team has received feedback, or we know that there's some wrinkle or something that needs to be addressed that maybe wasn't part of the MVP or minimum viable product that we're putting out there that we need to, re-architect or redesign because of feedback or whatever it might be. Guess what? Now you're back into the plan for just that specific thing. And you're going through plan, build, run again. And you're constantly going through the cycle of really kind of continuous improvement following that cycle.
So I have a question for you. When you think about your resourcing strategy for plan, is plan made up of full-time employees? Is it made up of consultants? Or what's the ideal mix? 100% FTE, 100% consultant, or something in between?
Yeah, it's a good question because I hear that one a lot. My personal philosophy is that as much as it makes sense for an organization, they should own the plan and the governance of the IAM program as close as possible as they can. That being said, you may have a very trusted partner from a third party perspective, whether it's consulting, maybe it's you or me, Jim, for example, right? Or some other, third party that you work with or whatever it may be. But the mix, I feel like, should be more heavily favored of employees versus non-employees, unless that's the strategy of, hey, we don't have an IT staff and we're totally committed to some third party who basically does everything for us. But I would still want to have a lot, people who are trusted, but really keep tabs on what is the strategy, is it being executed against, services, things like that. I think generally speaking, the mix that I would look at is on the plan side, it's probably shading more to employees. And as you move through build, maybe it's 50-50 because it's pretty rare that an organization can go off and implement something by themselves, especially if it's a new product where they don't have people who are trained or maybe resources are hard to find. And then as you move to the run side of things, I think there are certainly cost advantages to be able to take advantage of third parties to be able to kind of run that. I don't think you get rid of everyone on the run side, but I think the shift becomes more, potentially could be more third party focused versus on the plan side, which might be more led and driven by the employee side with support from experts, for example, to help with that.
Yeah. Now, even though it was my question, I'm going to say it's not really a good question. And the reason why is that it just doesn't have enough context, right? I think
Yeah.
the answer it would depend greatly on, uh, how big is the organization? How complex is it? How quickly did it grow to that? Because sometimes we go into clients and they've grown, exponentially over the last 5 years, and IAM's kind of an afterthought. And it's like, oh, we actually need to do something about this in a strategic way. Um, and then I also think that, it depends on where you are with, the Brent reality is it kind of depends on where you are with the resources that you have. If you don't have people who really are steeped in IAM, then you're going to be more heavily dependent on consultants. And if you have a good trusted partner, I think that's great. That puts you in a good position. I do think that the goal should be to start to shift that mix to have the internal talent. Um, but I don't think 100% on either end ought to be the target. I think even if you have in-house talent, bring in fresh ideas at that plan, at that strategy level, understanding what's happening in the industry. And look, you and I, before we got into consulting, we both suffered from the same thing, which was we worked at two or three places. We knew how two or three places did it, and they might have done it great. And some of the things we knew from those experiences were the right way to do things. And then we learned later that it can be done better in certain areas because we saw it at other clients. So when you look at, 5, 10 years in consulting and you say, well, I've worked with over 100 clients and I've gotten to see how they run IAM of over 100 clients. I've seen what works well and what's not working well. Then you can bring that you have no way but to not bring that level of experience with you. That becomes part of who you are. And so I think that, having that available to you at least is advisable.
Yeah. I think, consulting is not for everybody. I never would have thought that I would be a consultant. But I'll be honest, it's the best thing that I've ever done for me from a career perspective, but from an identity perspective is you're totally right. You work at a couple companies, you know how it works there. You don't really know how it works at other places unless you have a good network of people in other companies and you're out there attending conferences, and sometimes it's just hard to do within the bounds of working within a company. So a shameless plug for identity consulting. It is not for everybody, but it is absolutely a way to accelerate your knowledge within the identity field. I think you learn more in 2 to 3 years of consulting than you do in a decade at an organization, for example, because you are working through multiple clients and seeing how things are done, seeing what works, what doesn't work, kind of take that through. And I think those lessons help when you're trying to figure out how do you want to structure your identity team. Is plan, build, run the right model? I think, between us, the two of us, I think we agree that in theory that makes sense, but it's not a silver bullet. Not every organization can work through that model. Maybe there's a better way to do it or a more appropriate way to do it for another company. But I do like the model. I think that's, kind of how I like to structure things, because I think it makes sense. And it also is easier to describe for people of how we approach solving an identity challenge, for example. So I'm totally with you on the consulting side. It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world at this point.
The other area I was thinking, I think we could do further episodes on this PVR model, and I think if folks are interested in that, definitely reach out and let us know. But one of the other areas that got me thinking about this
Wait,
conversation.
before you go there, I just had an idea. What would be cool is if we could get some people that we know who specialize in a certain area, like build, like run, because obviously you and I have networks we can tap into if people are listening and they have people who they know that are kind of in that area. That would be cool to, make an introduction on LinkedIn. We'll take it from there. But I'm thinking of people like Chad, for example. I won't say his last name just so we protect the innocent, but brilliant, overall on identity, but tons of experience running a build type organization.
Yeah.
I would love to hear maybe some of his thoughts. Okay, we've worked together in the past, but having run plan and then kind of build together, what does that relationship look like? Where are the handoffs? What works? What doesn't work? Because then I think that also helps for maybe folks who are listening, be like, okay, yeah, these are the things I need to think about, because generally speaking, identity doesn't get done by one person.
Yeah, he might say, Jeff, remember that plan client that you had that you handed off to me for build work, and
Yeah, and
you
it
gave me
sucked.
none of the documentation that I needed, and the project blew up? No, of course, we never make that mistake.
Never.
No, so the thought that I was thinking was, so it's involved with a, let's just call it an RFP, proposal, talking about managing identity as a service. So, the run side of operations. It got me thinking about the component of that managed service provider is providing, supporting IAM, taking calls from users, troubleshooting level 2 issues. Okay, so that's run, right? That's core run. Core build is to take projects, all right? You want to upgrade from version 7 to version 8, or you want to implement some new workflows. And it's,
Hang on, I got to make a joke. Version 7, I'm guessing organizations are probably like several years behind. They're on 7 and they need to go to like 11.7 or something
yeah,
like that.
right. That's much
Sorry, I
more
couldn't
likely.
resist.
Yeah, that's much more likely. So that's what a project is. But we all know that when you're running an IAM program and you're responsible for a system, somebody might say, it'd be really great if you move that button over here. Nobody wants to create a statement of work to move a button, right? So what we do is we have this managed service provider, assuming we're in this model where we've kind of outsourced run, right? If we insource run and we insource build, maybe get back to whether that makes sense or not. We might just be able to do it. But I'd imagined a scenario, and actually with this managed service provider, there's some set aside of some hours for business as usual, BAU, enhancements. So it's small things, either to apply patches or to do these minor enhancements, like moving a button. And that to me is not build. That would fall within run. But there's really got to be communication back and forth, right? Because build team traditionally, let's just take like a custom software scenario, is they're going to manage the configurations and the code in some kind of source repository, like a GitHub or something like that. Changes are going to need to be made there, right? Everybody's swimming in the same pool, whether it's the run team moving a button, or it's the build team who's working on the next major upgrade. You don't want that button movement to be overwritten with them by the next major project. So there's got to be coordination. And I think that's the key to the plan, build, run model. It's philosophically, there's these towers, but when you look at them up close, there's a lot of routes that go back and forth between them, and there's a lot of, I'm not coming up with the right term, but basically
Tentacles.
There
You
you
went
go.
with roots.
Thank you.
I was thinking tentacles.
It is tentacles. That's the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, that gray area in between. I mean, communication's big. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where, one, nobody knows what's going on, and then two, one party, for example, controls all the decision making on what is in scope and what's out of scope. I know you and I have worked with clients where it's like, oh, they got into a bad relationship with their vendor, and there's one that I'm thinking of where basically the vendor could decide where something was in scope or not. That is a terrible spot to be in. if you're a customer, nothing is going to get done, and it's not going to get done as quickly as you want it to, at the very least. If I was your vendor or your managed service provider for identity, and you came to me and say, hey, I want to move that button, and then, okay, well, let me think about it. I will tell you whether or not I think it's in scope in our contract. And then if not, I will give you a statement of work to do that. And that'll take me 3-4 weeks. Nobody wants to be in that position. That sucks. That doesn't make any sense. There should be some flex for those minor enhancements. And, hopefully you've got a good relationship with vendors, and then, you're not getting kind of nickel and dimed on every little change, things like that. But that's a terrible spot to be in.
Yeah. And the scenario I just painted, I'm kind of sitting here kind of thinking that the reality of where that business as usual work, those enhancements ought to be is on the build side. There should be, I think you're right. You need to design, for me, plan, build, and run. I think we said we'd want to be more heavily weighted toward employee versus consultant in plan if we can. It's some weighting, but it's not 100% of either. Build, I think you could be 100% either way. I tend to find that customers are best to it at a minimum have an architect of their own, and probably enough developers where developers or systems engineers, call them what you want, where as long as they can keep those people busy 100% of the time, that's a good level of full-time employee to have. They shouldn't be like, oh, there's not enough work and we have these full-time people. That's where you have spikes like a system upgrade or a big pile of enhancements, or where something requires some kind of expertise that doesn't make sense for you to keep in-house. That's where it makes sense to use consultants at a minimum. But I also think that you could say strategically, we want to keep as few people in-house on the build side as possible. Because when times get lean, we can really tighten the belt by not enhancing the system and just kind of running at a very lean level for as long as we have to.
That button stays there and it's never moving.
That button is not moving. But I think on the run side, that's another area where you can go as really close to maybe you can go to 100% of completely outsourced. So go to an MSP or MSSP model. Now, I think to be successful in that model, though, requires some care and feeding, right? So whether you count the person who's doing the care and feeding as part of run or not, but it better be done. Because if you just kind of just say these folks are off doing their thing and they're going to do fine, it's not going to work. I also think you have to be realistic in terms of the scope that you turn over to them. Like I've heard clients say, well, we expected our MSSP to, provide us like a strategic aspect to what they do. And it's like, that's not how you've designed your contract with them. And what they're going to do is fulfill their contract. So you have to say, these are the services we want. They're well documented in terms of what we need, and make sure that, you're continuing to stay up with that over time. But I do think that's an area that could be outsourced.
Yeah. I almost disagreed with you, but when you started talking about oversight and governance really over that, I think that's where you pulled me back in. We don't want, vendors running amok in your systems without any type of governance or anything like that. Someone's got to kind of keep them honest and, report and pull things back and just make sure that things are running smoothly. So whatever phase you want to put them in, plan, build, run, I don't necessarily think it matters as long as somebody's doing it. But that's where I think of governance of the program and the associated services covers everything like that.
Now, Jeff, have you been following at all what's happening with the Johnny Depp defamation case?
Very loosely. I don't know what's going on with my YouTube algorithm, but I get like 6 different videos on my, For You every time I fire it up. So I've seen a couple things here and there, and just based on what I've seen, it sounds to me like Johnny Depp is like crushing this thing. Like he's totally winning, but that's just what I've seen from a perception standpoint. Where are you going with it?
So where I was going with it was the one thing that I heard was he had Amber Heard sign a post-nup agreement. So what's the difference between a post-nup and a prenup is when when the marriage happens and when the signing of the document happens. So rather than having her sign this document before they got married, he sent one of his people to her with it. And apparently that was where things snowballed and broke down. Like, I don't know all the details, right? And I don't want Johnny Depp to come after me and sue me for defaming him. But I just wanted to bring up the analogy that I think one of the things that when you're dealing with an MSP model is you have to think about the breakup before you enter the marriage, right? So, in other words, don't get yourself locked into using the vendor's technology platforms, right? If they say, oh, you don't need your own ServiceNow instance, use ours. That's great. When you're going through the divorce and you start saying, well, can we have all of our tickets? Like, those are in our ServiceNow instance. You can't have the tickets. So,
Or even if the data, I mean, data could be there, but now it became a lot more expensive to do that breakup, right? Now you've got to stand up your own or find a, work that into a contract with another vendor. Yeah, I mean, I I would want to own as much of the technology, hire someone else to operate it, but that's a bad position to be in. And you and I both being in consulting, that's like probably like nirvana. So, we're probably going against what we probably should be doing. But, we're doing the right thing, for people is, yeah, you don't want to be 100% dependent on a vendor. And if the vendor owns the tools, it makes it really hard to do a breakup. No matter
yeah.
how unhappy you are, someone is going to look at the contract like, yeah, it's too expensive to move on. We're going to have to stay married, for the kids, basically, is how that works out. Or the dogs or whatever.
We'll just be miserable together.
Right. All right. We've been going for like 45 minutes. Should we start to wrap this up?
Yeah, it's time for a snack. What do you say?
I could go for a snack. And I was thinking about this, before we hit record here. And here's my question for you. Are you comfortable eating on camera? Like in the middle of a conference call or whatever it may be, or even if someone schedules a meeting over lunchtime and sort of the expectation is like, yeah, we know people are eating, but this is the only time we had. Will you eat on camera?
I've done it. I think your role in the meeting is important. I like to keep my camera on during meetings. If I was eating deep dish pizza, no, I would not keep my camera on. Actually, it's funny. Like I had a snack that I was at Publix is the grocery store. You're moving to the Southeast. You're gonna experience Publix here pretty soon. They have a great bakery, and they made these things. They caught my eye, and I just had to buy them. They look like croissants, but smaller. They're flaky like croissants. They filled them with Nutella, that hazelnut spread.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this stuff's so
I love
good.
Nutella.
Oh, so good. They filled it with that, and then glazed them, and then drizzled Nutella over top. So this thing was like just a flavor bomb. But the problem was when you bit into it, like it flaked all over the place. And so definitely not something you want to eat over your keyboard.
I can imagine you on camera with like chocolate around your face or Nutella or whatever it is, like just all over. I was like, I am not comfortable eating on camera. Like I don't know. Maybe it's just me being self-conscious, or maybe it's the role I typically play in meetings. Kind of excited. That's certainly a big part of it. But no, I'm not a eater on camera. And this got me thinking to my second question is, okay, if you are eating on camera, what's a snack that you feel like you can get away with while you're on a conference call?
Well, I was going to say like some kind of candy or something, but if it was gummy, it would interfere with your ability to talk. Certainly any kind of beverage, but one thing I've always been a little self-conscious of is, for example, right now I've got a bottle of water. It's a disposable plastic bottle of water. So I wonder if people are judging me as they're sitting out there drinking out of their reusable cups. And they're they're thinking that guy he doesn't care about mother nature at all.
It's very clear.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, M&Ms, maybe. I want to hear what your answer is.
I'm not much of an eater on camera, like I said, but maybe if I can be discreet with it, an M&M is probably a good choice. Maybe a chocolate covered almond, maybe like a Jolly Rancher, or maybe like lemon heads or lemon drops, things like that. I could probably swing one of those.
Yeah. I mean, it totally depends. Like, I guess if I was hungry enough and I wasn't, conducting a presentation or something, I would just shut off my camera and, I'd eat like a corned beef Reuben if I had to. I'm trying to think of like,
here's your power play move, right? Is you're on camera, but you're standing at like a buffet and you're just keeping just food all over this plate and you don't care whatsoever. You're on cam, you're giving a presentation, but you're at this buffet. You're eating ribs. Maybe you're like, yeah, I'll take the end cut there of that prime rib at the same time, right? I mean, that would be like a total power play move from
that's
my
an
perspective.
alpha move. An alpha move.
Yeah, depending on how you want to look at it.
Well, so I'm a gym regular, and one of the things that is like a pet peeve for a lot of people is people who go to the squat rack and do arms, which I don't think it's that bad, especially if there are not enough people who like want squat racks, right? Or there's not people waiting to use the squat racks, right? So the one day I'm like doing arms on the squat rack because like I said, I don't think it's that bad of a thing. And I think it's overblown. And one of my friends comes over, he goes, "Oh, doing arms on squat rack. That's the total alpha move. Like, I don't care what you people think." Like, okay. That was his way of telling me, like, dude, that's not cool. But
yeah, that was a nice way to tell you. Like,
that was a very nice way. Actually, it was so nice that I was like, yeah, alpha move. That's right. That's what I am.
And now here you are thinking about it weeks, days, months later. I don't know whatever it was.
At least
wait a
year.
second. So it's stuck with you.
I think about it every time I do arms in the squat rack, which is like every week.
Well, there you go. So more power moves. So I guess what's our recommendation is take your next call at a buffet and
have a corned beef Reuben.
Yeah, exactly. And assert dominance, I guess, over the other callers. I don't know.
Yeah,
all right,
that's the way to influence people and make friends.
Yeah, exactly. We'll definitely give them a story at least. Hey, who was that guy in that on that call? I was like, he was eating ribs. With that. All right, let's call it. We're getting stupid on late on a Friday.
That's what happens.
All right, let's just call it. So I think we had a good conversation. We talked about plan, build, run. We talked about passwordless coming to a phone or some other device near you soon, and what you can and cannot and should or should not do on a conference call regarding food. I think that's a little bit something for everybody there.
Hopefully everybody gets something out of it and, can relax, listen to the podcast, get a mix of education and entertainment. And, we love hearing from folks and connecting on LinkedIn. I mean, I feel like the podcast has been picking up a little more steam lately because I've been getting more interaction on LinkedIn. And for the most part, it's people who probably would listen to the podcast for a lot longer had they found it earlier, because usually people are saying to me, just found the podcast and now I've got like all these episodes I got to catch up on. So kind of cool like that. I guess from that standpoint, if you know anybody, maybe mention to them that they should check out the podcast, and certainly connect to Jeff and I on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's very cool when we hear from folks who listen. So I know there's a couple folks have reached out to me. I'll be at RSA in a couple of weeks doing some fist bumps, or some folks have reached out, which is very cool. I'm always happy to do that and just kind of talk shop. As I said last time, I put on my gold and diamond pants just like everybody else. So I'm always happy to meet with folks and hear stories from the real world, as I like to say.
But then you make gold records.
Then I make gold records. I make gold podcasts. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. You can visit us on the web at identitycenter.com. We're on Twitter still. Elon has now put this purchase on hold because there might be bots. So we're still on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. Our live stream is still on hiatus as I kind of figure out what's going on with me from a scheduling perspective and a recording environment. but we still have our YouTube channel, idac.live, so you can watch the replays from there. We'll have to pick that up here pretty soon. Maybe next time we kind of do like a combined podcast / live stream or something like that, just to kind of keep that thing going, because I enjoy doing those.
I think we should troll Elon by creating an account called the IDAC bot account, Twitter account, but not operated through a bot, because we don't know how to do that.
It's a live person.
But just have a live person and see if it gets canceled.
I got trouble once with Twitter for creating a bot that would tweet things out automatically. I don't remember what I did it for. I think it was like a vote or something like that. And it got throttled basically in within the course of an hour. It didn't even last that long. I must have had the spam setting for whatever I was trying to do too high. So there are certainly ways to do that. Maybe just like automatically retweet and love all of the IDAC podcasts. That's great. All right, let's call it there. Thanks everybody for listening. Jim, thanks for your time as usual. And I guess with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.